Hello, everyone. I'm Zacharilla, one of the founders of the Intelligent Community Forum. Welcome to No Place But Home, conversations with leaders and thought leaders around the world about the place we call home. Well, this is the first dialogue in a series of 3 dialogues that we're going to have on social innovation and the after effects of COVID-19. Of course, we have been talking a lot about COVID-19. That's how this series began. By asking communities around the world and people around the world how they were responding to COVID. What we thought we would do now is really to talk about the world and the fallout from COVID. What is it going to look like? Where are we going? And can we go further inside to see the damage that's been done, but also the healing that's possible to make our communities better? So we're going to call today's segment, Did God Stay Home? We have a great way of measuring our financial institutions, our stock markets, but when we go to measure our social index, it is a very, very difficult thing to measure the impact of disease and isolation. So what we wanted to ask today was, what happens to our communities when they are cut off from their more essential institutions, their churches, their synagogues, their mosques, their social clubs? All of the things that are fundamentals to sustaining them emotionally and socially. What has been the consequence of that? We thought we would ask 2 people who sort of have a unique perspective on that, and I'd like to welcome them here today. At the top of the screen is the Reverend Dr. Tony Hart. He is the pastor of Beulah Baptist Church in Wappingers Falls. And we would like to welcome him here today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Reverend Hart. He is the pastor of that church since 1998. In his 3 decades of service in ministry, he has earned a reputation as a compassionate healer of communities. He's earned numerous honors, and he is listed in Who's Who among Americans of African ancestry. Reverend Hart, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be aboard.
Also joining us today is Missy Wallace. Missy is the executive director of the Global Faith and Work Initiative. That's a ministry of Redeemer City to City based here in the United States as well. She was the founder of the Nashville Institute for Faith and Work, subjects that she became inspired to study together during a career in corporate America and the nonprofit sector. And Missy, welcome to you as well.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, again, I appreciate you both being here. What I wanted to do was just start a little bit to ask you, where are you today? And tell us a little bit about your work. Dr. Hart, I'll start with you. It looks like you're home in Wappingers Falls.
Yeah,
and
in Newburgh.
Tell us a little bit about your
Newburgh.
parish. Yeah.
Oh, we have a wonderful congregation. The congregation is lovable. They've been found faithful. And we just enjoy trying to fulfill the Great Commission, which is to go out and make disciples. And we do it motivated by love. And so I'm honored to be the under shepherd. I've been serving there for 22 years. They allow me to pastor them. And I enjoy it tremendously. And my wife, she pastors with me. And she's a minister of the gospel as well.
Very good. And I'm going to circle back with you and ask what it's been like to have been separated from the flock a little bit. But Missy, yourself, you have a unique mission because you have looked at the issues of faith and work in terms of bringing your belief system into the workplace with the understanding that that would better inform both people and communities. Do I have that about right?
Sure. It's really just understanding that we were created to work, but that work has been broken, but that God has goodness out of every industry. And so I spent a long time in corporate America not understanding that my work in corporate America could be just as important to God's unfolding plan for the world as my work in the church could be. And so I've been on mission the last 5 to 6 years on helping other people understanding that all good work is for God and for good.
Very good. Now you've both tied your mission, your service to God, to the idea of improving communities, and of course, in your own ways, you've both become pillars to certain communities around, locally and around the world. The first question I have, Dr. Hart, just to circle back, what happens when a key pillar in a very small community, because Wappingers Falls is a village, I think there's like 6,000 people there or something. What happens when that congregation is cut off from you, from the preaching, from the actual gathering? Have you noticed any significant impacts?
Yes, it's twofold. In my estimation and observation, people through the virtual church, we've been able to stay together. But many of the worshipers, the parishioners, they miss the one-on-one contact with their friends and fellow worshipers and the fellowship that we have. So I miss that as well. And I just look forward to us being able to gather safely and prayerfully in the house of prayer as we do on a regular basis before the pandemic. So some people who are single, they feel lonely, and if they're living alone, so we have to maintain that contact with them. And the alienation beyond the four walls of the church, in my estimation, has increased amongst human beings.
Has it surprised you in any way that there has been that level of alienation or that level of distress? And what has been sort of the most significant pathology, if you will, that's spiritual pathology that's been presented to you?
I think some of the members on a spiritual roller coaster. It's the best way I can describe it. And I don't like the feeling. I understand it culturally and spiritually, but I would prefer something else. So we go with plan B. Missy Wallace, I figure we go with plan B since plan A is not readily available until the future, whatever date that will be. We go with plan B and try to make the best of it. Some people understand that they can get closer to God through prayer and Bible study on their own. And then when we have the virtual church, they enjoy some of the messages that have been proclaimed. So that's where we stand now.
Was there anything in your training in Springfield to be a minister, an ordained minister, that prepared you for this? Had you ever imagined a moment like this?
No, but I can tell you this. I worked in the prison system in the state of New York as a counselor. So I saw people who were traumatized and people who were alienated, and their value system was different in terms of criminality and antisocial behavior. And so I'm not surprised at how people are reacting to this now, because we're spiritual beings, we're social beings, and we need contact with each other. And when that's broken, there would be consequences and ramifications.
Yes.
Some
Missy,
may not be good.
Absolutely. Missy, I don't suspect you disagree with probably anything that Reverend Hart said, but you're looking at an added element to it, which is that, I'm a Roman Catholic, and we define people also as man, the laborer, human beings as laborers as well. It fulfills them. You're looking at it from the level of work as well. What have you found as people have been cut off not only from the congregations, their synagogues, their gathering places, but also from the thing that gives them both economic and psychological sustenance, which is what they produce?
We have been trying to analyze what kind of patterns we can find in work disruption. And basically, everybody's work has been disrupted in some way. So we've ended up putting work disruption on a grid, where on the x-axis is how much has your routine day-to-day work changed. Has your demand gone up a lot, or it's gone completely away and it's having to be radically upended? So for instance, someone that is in the senior management of Zoom, for instance, their work has gone up. They weren't expecting the entire world to be on Zoom 8 hours a day overnight. Whereas someone that's a restaurant owner and a place that's, shut down on quarantine, their work has totally gone away. So they're radically quickly working to figure out, how can I do delivery to keep the doors open? So if you think about that as one aspect of work disruption, and then you think of another aspect of how close to the socioeconomic margins were you before COVID happened. And so if you had a lot of socioeconomic flexibility or a lot of agency in your role versus if you didn't, and you were already working very close to the margins. And so if you put those two things on a 2x2, what we've found is that there are really kind of 4 buckets of work disruption. Kind of one bucket, the top right, the people whose demand is exploding and their socioeconomic and their agencies started high to begin with, they're overwhelmed and trying to keep up. The people whose work totally halted, but they were okay socioeconomically to start with, they are paddling real hard, strategizing, scared to death. They're going to start losing their socioeconomics. I call them strategizing with an unclear path. Then if you look at the bottom, the people that started socioeconomically towards the margins, if their work has totally gone away, they're suddenly impoverished and trying to survive. So their needs are very different than the person that's overwhelmed and trying to keep up. Their needs are around keeping food and shelter secure. Whereas the people trying to keep up, some of their needs are around ego and trying to be God and things like that. And that just super anxious. And then on the bottom right, the people whose work has gone up, but they were at the margins, I call that group the exploited and trying to progress group. So this group is the group that if they're running the manufacturing lines for more masks to be made faster, they're the ones being asked to work three consecutive shifts. Or they're the ones being asked to be exposed to the virus, the medical technicians on the front lines of the hospital working 2 or 3 shifts in a row in the ICU. And so I guess it's a long way of saying, I'm not sure we can come up with any 1 or 2 patterns in work disruption. I think there's at least 4, but one emotion that travels through all of them is anxiety. Right. But the anxiety is for different reasons.
Yes.
Interesting. So Missy, with your initiative, is there a way that you begin to infuse a sense of anxiety relief that is consistent with 3 very distinct groups that you've just laid out?
Yeah, 4 groups.
4 groups.
Because I'm coming at this from a Christian point of view, my motivation is to help people understand how the gospel and how the gospel of Jesus Christ speaks to this individually. And so a pastor came to me after we came up with this model and said, oh my goodness, those 4 groups just played out in a meeting on Zoom I had last night. He said he had somebody from each group. They were all super stressed, but their stress was going over each other's heads, not empathizing at all, because they didn't understand the group that they were in and that the pain points were so different. So they were all trying to meet someone else's pain point. And so what we've done with our work is try to explain that the pain point of the person that's being exploited is around justice and believing that God is a just God. So if we can present the gospel in a way that helps people understand justice and that God, that Jesus was the suffering savior and that he's in the suffering with you, that's helping that pain point around this work disruption. The person that's up at the top strategizing with an unclear path, they're scared they're going to lose their reputation. They're going to, that it was all on them and they failed, that the gig went down on their watch. So they're struggling with some identity issues, that really a lot of their entire identity is in their career. So we need to help them understand that their identity is actually in Christ. And so that's just a taste of what we're trying to do with these work disruption model, is to nuance the hope of the gospel and then even the outward love that comes through the pain points created by the work disruption.
That's very interesting. Reverend Hart,
yes.
As Missy Wallace is speaking, I'm thinking of my mother, who would comfort me during trials in my life, she would always quote, and she'd say, "My ways are not your ways. Understand that," right? She was a very devout Catholic little Italian woman, who wasn't a preacher, but when I needed the preaching, she gave it to me. There are unintended consequences. The psalm, right? The block that the builder rejected has become the cornerstone. We saw in New York, where I live and where you grew up, I believe you grew up in Harlem, if I'm not mistaken, or were born there. We saw suddenly people who, as Missy just described, might have been on the margins socially and economically, all of a sudden be applauded at 7:00 at night as essential workers. And it was almost as if we were getting a message that there was something going on. There were people out here who now we depended on for our food, for our provisioning, for our buses to run, right? They were the ones now that were being most exposed to this terrible disease. How do you look at a dynamic like that, and how do you sort of repurpose it so that your congregation can also feel a sense of justice and hope when some of them may have lost their jobs, some of them may have fallen to the disease, some of them are profoundly anxious?
That is profound. We're all trying to get closer to God. We don't try to put ourselves up as if we have all the answers. There's too many unknowns. We also don't want to degenerate into despair or go to the extreme of religious fanaticism, as if this is a hoax and this is not real. We begin from the premise that and making sure that our paradigm is accurate, in the sense that whatever you feel is okay. And I think that helps to the healing process. And Missy Wallace talked about the pain work. So we don't try to dismiss how people feel. I feel all the workers are essential because we live in a free market society that you need money in order to live. So if you're not working and there's people on the front lines who are putting their life in harm's way, and they're doing it in a way where they're selfless. Jesus was that way. So we try our best to say, well, since Jesus was the personification of love and he's the healer, we're looking at those in the medical establishment on the front lines, and all the rest of us, we make our contribution. So we just try to keep that bond open, the lines of communication with each other, that if you're going to cry, if you feel numb, if you feel scared or whatever, just hope thou in God. And we're in this together. So we don't try to say we're the paragon of virtue and we don't feel anything, because that doesn't work at all.
And yet these are the same people who are our fellow citizens in our community, right? And all of a sudden, as I say, I'm throwing open my window at 7:00 at night on 68th Street in Manhattan and just cheering along with thousands of other people. Again, the question is, how do you use that awareness now? Because our eyes have been opened to each other in a way that I don't think was taking place in society for the last maybe 10 or 15 years, and certainly not in the workplace. So it's a question for both of you. How do you use that in a post-pandemic environment to create a more vibrant community in a society that is fragmenting in a lot of different ways?
Missy Wallace, you go ahead and I'll
So I
respond to whatever you say.
Yeah, maybe you should go first, but I don't know that there's a perfect answer, but I do think that all of us have attachments to things around, because we're in a Western society where individualism is, in our core of our DNA as a country. And I think all of us are being confronted with having to realize giving up control is hard. Comfort and security is hard. And I think with up to 20 million people unemployed, I think a lot of people have maybe entered perhaps more socioeconomic marginal situation. I would call them situationally at the margins. They probably will pop back out pretty quickly because of education, because of social capital, because the systems maybe work for them. but they've had an experience now of being on the margins because of a situation. And so I think one opportunity is perhaps people can, there's a risk in it too. The risk is, oh, I've been on the margins, I got out. Why can't everybody get out? I think the opportunity is being at the margins situationally for a short time might show you some of the structural problems we have that are keeping others in the margins long-term systemically, and that there might be some more engagement and some more grace about what's going on in that regard. And perhaps we can all just see what we can do to further some of these issues around pulling people out of the socioeconomic marginal places when it's due to some systemic issues more than personal issues.
Yes, I see how we're in a conundrum. Which way do we go? Are we going to deal with how people feel and what they're experiencing? And since Missy Wallace talked about the structural aspects, then we have to become agents for social change in Christ. And that is something that a lot of people want to try to disregard, but I'm of the understanding that it has to be holistic. So we assess the situation and then say, all right, how do we proceed forward? And someone in the congregation asked me the question, and I'm sure you've heard the question as well, well, why did this happen? And my answer was, I don't know why it happened. So I don't really spend a lot of time asking God why, because that may lead to spiritual paralysis. I may never get the answer, but I do ask God in my prayers, in my private devotion, what can I do? What do I need to do? And I've reached a point now to go out and encourage others. Let's struggle spiritually in every conceivable way to try to bring about the transformation that we need as we come up with some kind of answer to this global pandemic, COVID-19, with vaccine or remedy or whatever. But there's other structural things that we need to address.
I was going to say, I think that people in the United States that are maybe in the middle class or above, I guess, financially, I don't know that we as a generation or a few generations that are living right now have really experienced all that much collective discomfort. We haven't, I'm, in terms of quarantine experiences, I won the lottery. Okay. I'm not living in a city that right now that's particularly, our shutdowns were a little bit less. I live in the suburbs, so my kids can go outside. I mean, my groceries can be delivered. I haven't lost my job. My husband hasn't lost his jobs. We haven't had any death or destruction. We haven't had COVID in the house. So in terms of the COVID experience, we have not had anything all that devastating happen. Yet still we're experiencing some frustration and some anxiety and things. And I was walking on a trail near my house and I ran into someone, and one of my things that is bothering me, but I feel guilty about it bothering me, is how disrupted my children's college educations are, which is of course making me incredibly grateful that they have colleges to go to and those things. But it's disconcerting how much is bothering me. So I'm trying to understand, like, what's behind this? What am I really after here with this? And what it is it's about putting them on a path to not having to have, to having security, to not having discomfort. And this friend of mine said, back in the 40s, 2 whole years went by where people's colleges were disrupted in the war and whatnot. And it just made me realize, like, we just collectively, now I know people have, but collectively as a country, we've not experienced significant suffering at the middle class and above. I know people on the margins have. I know people, our Black and brown brothers and sisters have. I think collectively as a country, we need to move towards experience some discomfort for the sake of the other, not experiencing discomfort once all our needs are met. And by the way, I'm preaching to myself. I am a hypocrite in this myself. I don't want to sound like I have it figured out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's very well said. Reverend Hart, what I hear there is something my parents taught me. They went through the Depression, and my father fought in World War II for 4.5 years. They had such a certain sense of calm and peace.
Okay.
And I realized as I got older, and it's the question that I have for you is, there is something about suffering that if looked at the right way, does lead to a certain, again, awareness of the other in the community.
Yes.
And build a policy of compassion. And again, as has happened through a lot of this experience, I keep referring back to the old passages that I heard as a kid. No cross, no crown. Right?
That's
no
right,
Good Friday, and as Christians say, no Good Friday, no Easter Sunday. And as the Buddhists said, suffering is because of attachment. We get attached to our egos. Again, is that an accurate observation? And again,
oh, yes.
Are you hearing it as well? And are you seeing
yes.
something lighten up around it?
Yes, but I can just share in the African-American experience that has been the story. It was like our experience is like two giant hands, one hand for oppression and one hand for liberation and resistance. So, and it's been through our faith-based institutions, particularly the church, where people were able to live under these harsh conditions and experience all kinds of dehumanization and alienation, and at the same time try to go forth with some dignity. So yeah, you're right. There's redemptive suffering. As Jesus was the suffering servant, and it's no surprise to me that the church is still the most viable organism or institution in society, the body of Christ. So you're right. Yeah. And what Missy Wallace stated, one thing I'm concerned about is compassion of fatigue in American society. I hope we can sustain this compassion now, and that when things change, that we continue to go forward programmatically or even organizationally to bring about the structural changes that we need and deal with the inequities and inequalities that exist, whether on race, gender, class, sexual orientation, you name it. All of these things need to be addressed.
Missy, just to sort of pick up on that a little bit, we just did another program on ethical smart cities. Our Canadian friends are doing some really, really interesting work in trying to find ways to address a lot of the issues that we're talking about. In an area where, traditional faith has fallen off, but now they are trying to find through an ethical structure a way for communities to reestablish themselves. So my question is for both of you, but I'll start with Missy. How do you implement ethics in an ethical society where there is a diversity in population and secularism seems to be the spiritual order of the day? Is it even possible for a community?
I wish I had, there's a person from Washington University, John Isazu. I don't know if you've ever met him. He would be a great person to have on your podcast to talk about this. He's written a book called Confident Pluralism, which is about how to work on some of these issues when there isn't a similar starting point of what ethics and truth is. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I do look back, like I look at when Paul, the Apostle Paul, went to Athens, and what he did was enter into the conversation by showing the truth of what your philosophers believe. And through agreeing on some truths, then there could be a trust base built to have different conversations. I am worried. I know everyone in our country is about the just crazy polarization.
Yeah.
Thinking about it, even around this virus, at the beginning, we all unified on this pain point of flatten the curve. And then this virus became politicized, and now we're not unified at all on how to fight this virus collectively. And it's like we're missing a piece of truth that we can all agree on. At the beginning, the truth was we've got to flatten the curve. And so we unified around it. And now we don't have a shared truth. And so I think part of moving together in an ethical framework is finding a shared truth. And I think one shared truth in our country, we don't act on it, but it's written into our founding documents, is in the dignity of all persons being created equal. And I do think that most people in our country at some level are leaning towards this truth. And so maybe that's the starting point.
So subscribing to that proposition, whether it in fact exists in our cities and our communities or not. Is that, Dr. Hart, I'm going to go back to you. I wanted to pick up. I wanted to pick up on that question because again, Missy addresses it here, and that is, it used to be specifically in the African American churches, as it was with my grandparents, with the Catholicism in the Italian churches. It was the center of their lives. And it is what helped them overcome their struggles because they were discriminated against as well for being Catholics, among other things. The African American experience, I should say, in this country has been one that adherence to faith has allowed them to overcome obstacles that are almost unimaginable in the human condition. My question, though, is it still as vibrant as it was in a previous generation to the generations that you're pastoring now, to the kids and to the younger folks, the ones that have nice jobs, as Missy described, in the workplace, for example?
That's the challenge. There's so many voices, and Missy Wallace can tell you, I'm sure she's aware of this. There's so many voices. There's so many different ideologies, philosophical, religious paths that people offer. The church has to become more relevant, and I think connect themselves with the culture that the youth are living in. They like rap and hip hop and all, so you can turn that around. Kanye West found it out. This is not an endorsement of him, but he uses rap in gospel music, and the kids like that. So if I'm preaching a message that's rejecting everything that the kids are embracing, they don't see any relevancy in the church, and the parents will have a hard time trying to get them to come. But if you have somebody who's enlightened about what's going on, and you talk with the youth, and they have a role to play, they a sense of belonging. That's it. If they have a sense of belonging in the church, and they see that what they bring is being embraced by the leadership in all dimensions of the church, then they'll be a part of it because it's something they need.
Right. Missy, similar in the workplace? I mean, what he described could apply to the workplace.
Yes, I mean, I think it gets back to pain points. And so what is the pain point? We all have a pain point. And Gallup's done a number of surveys, but I want to mention two of them. One is that in the US, 78%, I think it is, people are either disengaged to miserable in their work. 78% people disengaged and miserable in their work, with at any given time, and this was pre-COVID, pre all the layoffs, but at any given time, 50-something% would look for another job at any given time. And then compile that with another survey by Gallup, where they did a survey over a number of years to try to analyze what the whole wide world is thinking. And they were looking at developed and developing countries. They were looking at affluent and poor people. They were looking at all kinds of different things to see if there were any consistencies across what they would find, across the globe, across socioeconomic classes, across races, and across religions. And what they found, they said, was the single most important finding in the history of Gallup. And what they found is that what people care about more than love, safety, and security is a good job. And so jobs are an incredible pain point. They're an on-ramp to a person's heart. And then you're about changing cities. They're an off-ramp into changing cities. And so if people can understand how their work matters to their city, and how treating people that they work with matters to their city, and how their work can change their city, I think that is where I think there's a convergence here of like an on-ramp to the heart and an off-ramp to city change around work and the pain points at work.
Excellent.
Reverend Hart, that to me lends itself to saying, if you're going to do that, if you're not going to be miserable in your job, you have to have a broader perspective.
Oh,
You have to
absolutely.
have at least a global perspective, if not a universal perspective, right?
Yes.
You have to understand service.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the
Absolutely.
happiest people I know in New York are the Little Sisters of the Poor.
If
You know,
you don't extend
and they're
yourself
poor.
beyond
You know,
yourself, if you don't extend yourself beyond yourself, that's a miserable life.
Mm.
There's a woman named Dorothy Sayers that wrote in the 40s out of the UK context, and she has an essay called Why Work? And it's about serving the work instead of the work serving you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's a beautifully written essay. And a colleague of mine was touring NASA one time, and he ran into someone that was a janitor at NASA. And he says, "Hey, what do you do? You know, what do you do here?" He didn't know he was the janitor. And the guy said, "I launch rockets." He's like, "I sweep the floors.
Yeah.
If the floors were dirty here, the rockets wouldn't launch.
That's
I
right.
launch rockets."
That's
And
right.
so just reframing, you know, all work has toil, and some work has a whole lot more toil than other. Absolutely, admittedly, some work has extortion in it and a whole lot of pain in it. I don't want to dismiss that. But I do think that if we embrace that all work has toil and just try to reframe, how might our work be part of God's unfolding story instead of how does it make us more money, make us more comfortable, give us more promotions, we might be able to find a little more contentedness.
Excellent. Excellent.
Misty, let's talk about technology as a tool to maybe accomplish that. I noticed that on your website, you have several tools for sort of developing these notions, and one in particular to managing work disruption in a post-COVID or COVID environment. What role does technology play to get us to that point that we're both talking about here?
I mean, we're all on lockdown, and here we are in a Zoom call because of technology, right?
Right.
Technology, I mean, I wouldn't consider myself an early adopter. I'd consider myself just middle of the bell curve. Maybe for someone in her 50s, I'm a little on the tech savvy end, but just in general, I'm a middle of the bell curve adopter. And we can see so many pros and cons of technology, but right now I feel like it is our only ticket to connectivity. But I feel like it's also our biggest obstacle to divisiveness in our culture. Because we can create echo chambers and just hear our own view and things like this. So I think our challenge with technology right now is to figure out how we can continue for it to foster community and increase that and decrease the fostering divisiveness.
Very good. Reverend Hart, similar question. Obviously, you know, at the Intelligent Community Forum, we have the ICF method, which influences mayors and others to look at a more holistic view of running their cities. Technology is part of it, but so is sustainability and the knowledge that comes from the workforce. If you were able to consult 200 mayors, for example, at one time, what would be your counsel in terms of saying to them, ladies and gentlemen, you had better watch out for this one spiritual crack or crisis that may come over the next year or so in the post-COVID world. Beware of that. It could be dangerous, but use it properly and you're on your way. I know I didn't send that question to you ahead of time, but
that's a profound question. No, it's good. I have to think about it. You said one thing, I would say to them that as the technology evolves, my son-in-law, he's an expert in this field. Right? My grandkids know about technology better than me. All right. So I would say to them, let's try to get as much information we possibly can so we can use this for good. As Missy Wallace stated, I mean, there's hate speech, there's all kinds of things out in social media. So with this technology, let's try to be on the cutting edge. Let's be headlights and not taillights to try to get ahead, to bring people together rather than promoting polarization and division. So,
very good. Missy, same question to you. And I know you do work with cities and you even work with pastors and people like that, but what would be your sort of warning, your prophetic warning to the mayors of communities, going forward? They've already seen a lot of social unrest. They've seen, what happens when you haven't aligned your cities properly. What would be your warning shot to them, and then how could they steer it in the right direction so that we do have better communities?
I think this is a point in our country where unification around kind of collective good feels more important than any particular place on a policy spectrum. And we need leaders that are modeling caring for others, not pitting each other against each other. And so I think if I was a mayor, I feel like the most important thing right now is a sense of we're all in this together for our city instead of us versus them. There's so many us versus them. And I feel like some leadership in our country is modeling and exacerbating that.
Mm-hmm. And it is certainly not the path that you two have chosen to follow, which is a unifying path. Let's do our 1-minute drill, and then I'll let you go back to work. There has been a lot of good that has actually come out of this, and we've talked about it. We've examined it on this program. Reverend Hart, what has been the most heartening thing that you've seen from your community and your congregation during this crisis?
That people still have faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. They're not wavering about, I don't know if I want to follow Jesus. They have deepened their faith. And that's what's on there. They're looking forward for us to get back together to worship in the house of prayer. They're looking forward to it. So
they want to embrace it again.
Yeah, they're reasonably well. That's the way I could put it.
Very good.
Reasonably well. And so that's what I see, that people are pressing into God even more. And they're enjoying, if they're living with their children and the family, they're enjoying the conversations. They're bonding in a more intimate, deeper way. And that's what I see.
Yeah. I met Elie Wiesel one time, and he said that, as my mother would say, the Lord works in mysterious ways. Maybe that's what's going on here. Missy, same thing to you. What's given you sort of the biggest lift, the most heartening thing you've seen during this crisis?
I think it's similar but slight variance, which is I think people who run real fast all the time and never stop to do any kind of reflection at all are, and not everybody has had a slow baked cookie COVID. Some people are just completely doubled down, working twice as hard as they were before COVID. But I think no matter how your COVID experience is playing out, chances are you're doing some reflective thinking that is taking you into a spiritual questioning. And so what am I here for? What does happen if everything shuts down? What does happen if, it's just lack of control leads to questioning, that leads to reckoning with, is there a God or is there not a God? And so I think it's not just that people still believe in Jesus Christ. I think it's that more and more and more people are stopping to reckon with what are the truths of Christianity. So I think that's hopeful.
Very good. And we can still go on, no matter how bad it gets. We can keep pushing forward and live with hope, irrespective of what we believe, who we are, and we can do it together. That's what I'm hearing from you too. Well, listen, we could go on for another couple of days with this conversation. But
this is wonderful.
Reverend Tony Hart, thanks for making the time. Missy Wallace, thanks for coming to us from Nashville. And we'll hopefully do this again sometime. So very much appreciated.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Thank you. Wonderful.
My pleasure. This is Lou Zacharilla for the Intelligent Community and our No Place But Home series on behalf of my producer, Matt Owen, and the Intelligent Community organization around the world. Thank you very much for being a part of this. To learn more about us, go to intelligentcommunity.org. And remember, there really is no place like home. Take care, everyone.
God bless.